Welcome to the 57th episode of the Head Kick KO podcast. Today we are talking about UFC Fight Night, Magomed Ankalaev versus Thiago Santos. After that, we're going to be taking a look at a couple of fight announcements, and those are going to be some pretty big fights that will take place a little bit later in the year. And then lastly, we are going to look forward to next week's fight card, which is headlined by Tom Aspinall and Alexander Volkov. So we're obviously going to start right at the main event of UFC Fight Night, Santos versus Ankalaev. And this wasn't really the best main event that you will see all year. At the end of the day, there were just two guys in there that are both very powerful and both very good counter strikers. So when you combine those things, there was a lot of hesitancy. But both fighters still really showed some strong moments, showed some good skills. So it wasn't a complete waste because there are some positive things that you can look at based off what took place. And looking at Ankalaev, who was the winner of that fight, deservedly so, the biggest thing was his control and forward pressure. Even in the moments where Santos was winning, you never really felt that Ankalaev was going to lose this fight, and that was from an early point. And even when Santos landed those big shots and dropped Ankalaev, in that third round, right after that happened, he was able to go right back out, get control, and really push Santos back up against the fence. And to Santos' credit, he still fought reasonably well for the position that he was in most of the night. Landed some really, really strong leg kicks and in pretty high quantity as well. And then he also landed some nice strikes. Unfortunately for Santos, he didn't quite land enough. And when there wasn't a lot of grappling and there wasn't a lot of striking going on, octagon control is a big thing in terms of scoring, so it goes towards Ankalaev. And even if you were to really disregard octagon control at all from that fight, you're still probably walking away with Ankalaev because he did have the takedown in the fourth, and he was landing the majority of the better strikes in that fight. So, the biggest question here is what is next for these guys, and there's a lot of question marks where each of these guys are going to move from here. A lot of people really like Ankalaev, and deservedly so. He is a really balanced fighter at 205, has really good striking, very powerful, and he showed that he can go 5 rounds, which is obviously a quality that you need if you are going to be a champion. But with that being said, I'm not necessarily ready to give him that championship opportunity next. I think there's a lot of moving pieces at 205 right now. And if you look at the rankings, Glover Teixeira is scheduled to fight Jiri Prochazka for the belt. So there's obviously a title challenger in line already. And then after that, you have Jan Blachowicz and Alexander Rakic. And I don't remember exactly if that fight got rebooked, but they did book that fight. That fight fell through. Jan had to pull out. But it sounds like that fight is going to happen eventually. So Magomed Ankalaev doesn't really have a lot of options. He just beat the number 5 guy in the world. And there's 4 guys ahead of him that are already booked. That really only leaves Anthony Smith left in terms of who he's going to fight next. So that's where I believe he should go. And that fight really doesn't do much for him, but his other option would either be to fight behind him in the rankings or wait, and I don't think either of those are incredibly appealing options. So I think Anthony Smith is a good fight where Anthony's going to show you some different looks from what you saw in the Santos fight, and worst case scenario, he adds a really strong name to his resume. And I think that would be a good fight for both for both Smith and Ankalaev, because if Smith goes out there and gets a win, he's obviously right back in title contention and beat one of the biggest up-and-comers in the division. And then for Santos, Santos is in an interesting position because I kind of have a group of guys at 205 pounds that need to get matched up, and we're going to see a collection of them, I feel like, get matched up amongst one another. So you've got Santos, who is currently 5, but he's going to slide to at least 6, maybe 7. I think 6 would be the better option, but he's going to be in that section of the rankings. Thiago Santos. And then you've got Dominick Reyes at 7, Volkan Ozdemir at 8, and Jamal Hill at 10. So I think you're going to see those 4 guys matched up amongst each other. So, for example, I think the direction the UFC is going to go is Thiago Santos versus Dominick Reyes, and then Volkan Ozdemir versus Jamal Hill. That's the direction that I would predict if I had to make a prediction. But I think it might make a little more sense to do Jamal Hill and Dominick Reyes and then Thiago Santos and Volkan Ozdemir. I just feel like those matchups are a little bit more beneficial to, Jamal Hill versus Dominick Reyes makes a lot of sense. If you're trying to get Jamal Hill more experience, Dominick Reyes, seasoned veteran, total experience. So I think Reyes versus Hill makes sense, and then Volkan Ozdemir versus Santos also makes sense. You can kind of switch that up a little bit, and then that could be a little 4-fighter tourney in that weight class. You can match the winners of each of those fights up with one another, and then they're in the top 5, and then from there you also have Nikia Krylov and Paul Craig, who are fighting not this weekend. So they'll be on the upcoming fight card. So that could also change the landscape depending how that fight goes. Krylov and Craig have already fought some of those 4 guys that I mentioned previously. So they offers less options, but I wouldn't completely eliminate those names from that group of fighters that could get matched up. So I think there's a lot of fun fights there at 205 that we're going to see here take place based off the unbooked names like Santos, like Reyes, like Jamal Hill. And then in the co-main event, we had Song Yadong versus Marlon Moraes. And this was... watching Marlon Moraes lose is always tough because you can look back on the fond memories of Marlon Moraes, and they are very fond memories, and he has done some incredible things in his career. His knockout of Aljamain Sterling's an all-time great knockout. He's got a win over Jose Aldo, and I know some people say he lost that fight, but whether you think Moraes won or lost that fight, it was still a very, very good fight. And a close fight with Jose Aldo is something that many people dream of. Even pro MMA fighters, if they could go 3 competitive rounds with Aldo, they would be very, very impressed with themselves. So Marlon Moraes has had a great career, and to see his recent stretch of fights where he just hasn't held up as well, and because of that, he's lost 4 fights in a row, and this fight was very similar to that. Song Yadong is an incredible fighter, very quick hands, throws great combos, and when you pair that with Marlon's deteriorating chin, Song Yadong was able to connect with a very, very nice right hand that came from a unorthodox angle. He comes underneath the arm, almost like an uppercut, but not your traditional uppercut. Some characteristics of a hook. I don't know how exactly you would classify that, but very, very good punch from an angle that's hard to see coming, and that knocks Marlon Moraes out. Very strong performance from Song Yadong, and he looked very impressive. And at the end of the day, he is only 24 years old, and he has a ton of UFC experience already, and he's gonna go places in this sport, and I'm very, very intrigued to see where he goes from here. For Song Yadong, I think there are a couple possible names that you can look at for his next opponent. I mean, he called out Dominick Cruz. I'm not really the biggest fan of that Dominick Cruz fight. It feels weird because the hatchet has been buried between Team Alpha Male and Dominick Cruz. If you didn't know, Song Yadong is a Team Alpha Male member. His head coach is Uriah Faber. So the call out of Dominick Cruz is a little, is he doing it because he wants to fight Cruz? Is he doing it because Faber said, hey, call out Cruz? There's a lot of questions there. And I think that Dominick Cruz deserves to fight a veteran. He deserves to fight someone ranked higher than him based off his last two fights where he took on Casey Kenny, up-and-coming prospect, after he got a title shot, right? He gets a title shot and then fights someone who I believe was ranked 15 or maybe even unranked. And then he fights Pedro Munhoz, who is a challenge for anybody. And I think Dominick Cruz needs to be rewarded based off his performances in his last two fights rather than getting a 24-year-old up-and-comer who has looked very, very good. So I think a more likely fight for Song Yadong is a Pedro Munhoz. I like that matchup. And I think beating Pedro Munhoz, that's the type of fight where you beat Munhoz and then it's like, okay, you're legit. No offense to Marlon Moraes because he is a great fighter, but as we discussed earlier, he doesn't have the best chin and he is a beatable opponent. And that's not to say Pedro Munhoz is unbeatable, but it's a step up in competition. So I really like that Pedro Munhoz, Song Yadong. If not, there's also a piece of me that wants to see Sean O'Malley versus Song Yadong. Overall, I think we need to get Sean O'Malley on that 274 card in Phoenix. So I think the date is going to be more important for Sean O'Malley than anything. But if you can get Song Yadong, that would be a type of fight where if you beat Song Yadong, that really silences some doubters if you're Sean O'Malley. Because this may not be your veteran, but this is going to be someone who is going to be in the division with you for a large period of time. And, we got a booking of Marlon Vera versus Rob Font, so that takes some options off the table for both Sean and Song Yadong. So that fight makes a level of sense for both guys. And then for Marlon Moraes, I'm really not sure where we're going to go from here. We've got 4 losses in a row, and I believe they're all by knockout. Song Yadong, Merab, Corey Sandhagen. Regardless, it doesn't really matter that much. But I think a fight with Cody Garbrandt makes sense if Cody Garbrandt wants to jump back to 135. I think they're both in a similar position in their career and have had similar issues. So you can get one of those two guys back on track. However, the loser would be in a very bad position, so that would be the counterpoint to that. That fight does interest me. From there, I'm not sure what you do with Moraes if that's not the fight. Do you give him another young up-and-comer? Do you release him? That's a very real possibility after 4 straight losses. Does he retire? There's a lot of question marks there, and I'm not sure that anything I say right now is going to answer any of those questions just based off, I can't predict if the UFC is going to cut somebody. Well, I guess I could, but it's not real productive to sit here and say, oh, well, the UFC cut this person for that reason or cut that person for this reason. It really doesn't get us anywhere. So Marlon Moraes has a lot of question marks around him. I'm sure we'll talk about Marlon Moraes at a later date when we have some answers to those questions. But for now, Marlon Moraes is probably closing in on the end of his UFC career. And then from there, we also had a very good fight against Sodiq Yusuff and Alex Caceres. Sodiq Yusuff had a very strong performance. Going 3 rounds with Caceres is dangerous just because of how slick he can get to your back. There were a couple moments in that fight where Caceres gets some control, starts moving to the back, and you're like, oh boy, he's going to find a rear naked choke. Oh boy, he's going to find a rear naked choke. He never did, obviously, But for Sadiq Yusuff to be able to manage that danger and still get out with a win, I think is very impressive. He kicked the leg incredibly well, and going up against someone like Caceres, that is a good game plan. So he kicks that lead leg very well, and mixture, he threw some inside, some outside, so very strong in that aspect. And then he also landed some big shots with the hands. So overall, impressed by Sadiq Yusuff. Yusuff is someone I'm very high on. He looks very, very good. And this might not have been the most entertaining fight you'll ever see Sadiq Yusuff in. A lot of people were saying this was going to be fight of the night. This was going to be a tremendous fight. He controlled it very well, but it wasn't like an entertaining barn burner. I think we'll see some of those from Sadiq Yusuff in the near future. It just wasn't this one. And no hate for that. No hate there, because this was an incredible performance in terms of going out and getting a win. Going out and getting a win is far more important than putting on an incredible show and a fight of the night every time you go out there. After the fight, he calls out Bryce Mitchell. I don't hate that, but I don't love it at the same time. I just think there's better options for both guys at this point. Bryce Mitchell obviously fought on that Covington Masvidal card, and we didn't talk about him, so I guess we can talk about him for a second here in this. But just where Sadiq Yusuff and Bryce Mitchell are, I think they're both going to be in the UFC for a while. I don't think you make that fight today. Just looking at what we have here, if I'm matching up Sadiq Yusuff, names like Edson Barbosa and Dan Ige are two names that jump off the page of, wow, those would be really fun fights, and they make a level of sense. And then for Bryce Mitchell, I really want to see that Giga Chikadze fight. I mean, for Bryce Mitchell, I mean, maybe they move him even further up in the rankings like a Josh Emmett. I don't necessarily think that that's going to happen. But Bryce Mitchell versus Giga Chikadze, I think, is a strong fight to make in that division. So, with that being said, Bryce Mitchell versus Sadiq Yusuff, if I saw that pop up on Twitter tomorrow and saw that fight was official, I wouldn't be angry about it. I just don't think that is the best option for both guys right now. I think they will eventually fight, but I'm not sure that right now is the time to make that fight. And then for Caceres, I'm not necessarily out on him. I think he still is very talented. I think he's going to take on someone at 145 pounds just outside of those rankings. He probably won't get another ranked fight. So maybe that is Hakeem Dawodu. Maybe that is Billy Quarantillo. Those are the two names that stood out to me. You could also do Dawodu versus Quarantillo. But I think those are some good fights for Alex Caceres, where he's fighting guys who are not, Dawodu and Billy Quarantillo are far from bums and are very good fighters in their own rights. So I think that those fights would make sense. And then on the flip side for Dawodu or Quarantillo, if they go out there and beat Caceres, they're probably getting a ranked fighter afterwards. So I think that makes sense for everyone involved in that situation. Moving forward with this card, we had Khalil Rountree versus Kyle Robertson. Very, very, very strong performance from Khalil Rountree. I mean, that finishing sequence was tremendous. I mean, he lands a big shot, and he's really just working towards a finish. And he did so in a way where it wasn't the typical type of finishing instincts that you see from a fighter. I like to talk about finishing instincts where, guys get someone on the cage, they mix to the head, they mix to the body, and they just never let them breathe after they were hurt. That's not exactly how Khalil went out there and got his finish. He hurts Kyle Robertson and then just throws wild shots, big shots, but never anything where you're like, oh, how would you do that? It felt like everything he did was effective. And I feel like that is a type of finishing instinct in its own rights, where throwing a soccer kick to the body to a downed opponent is not something a lot of guys are pulling out of the bag of tricks. But Khalil Rountree did it at the perfect time, and it eventually led to that finish. Because if you get kicked in the body like that, you're not getting back up, and if you do, like Carl Robertson did, you're falling right back down. So overall, very strong finishing instincts and an incredible performance from Khalil Rountree, and he's now got back-to-back victories, so he's kind of back on track. And I think with a win or two more wins, he probably only needs one more, and he'll be fighting ranked opponents at that 205 pound weight class. And then probably one of the fights I was looking forward the most was Drew Dober versus Terence McKinney. And before we even talk about what took place in this fight, let me tell you two things. This is going to be kind of a long discussion because I'm very interested and intrigued in this fight. And I'm very intrigued in Terence McKinney as a prospect. So I'm going to talk a lot about this fight. And then the other thing we're going to discuss real quick is what exactly Terence McKinney was up against when he stepped into the octagon. Because I feel like that kind of it's part of this story here, right? Terence McKinney fought 2 weeks ago, I believe. And he takes this fight on 10 days notice or so. And those two things are already very tough, right? It's not easy to do. Just up in there on short notice right after a fight. So he's already earned incredible respect just based off that. From there, he's facing Drew Dober, and Drew Dober is an established UFC veteran and wildly above any fighter that Terence McKinney has ever fought. So he's taking the biggest leap of his career to fight the biggest and toughest fighter he has ever fought on 10 days' notice, 2 weeks after he had previously fought. So Terence McKinney is going in there with a lot against him. And then he gets in there, and he gets off to a tremendous start. I mean, he lands a knee, and that's within 10 seconds. And I don't know whether that knee drops Drew Dober or not, or whether that's a slip and a stumble. But he hits Drew Dober with that knee. And when Drew Dober gets back up, he pops him again with a punch. And that was definitely a knockdown. And Drew Dober gets back up. He lands another knee. He's got some ground and pound in there. Almost gets a finish in 30 to 45 seconds. And then from there, he is just trying to put Drew Dober out. I mean, he threw a very nice head kick that was on the brink of being illegal. And that's when you'll see some of the best head kicks is when someone has just got up, right? If someone's not standing straight up and you hit him with a head kick, that's a good time to get him, right? That's like when Jorge hit Nate and Nate was leaning down, right? Those are good times to throw head kicks. You just got to time them properly or else it's an illegal strike. He times it very, very well. And it doesn't land 100%, but that's the type of thing where that'll hurt even if you block that. Landed one really nice spinning back fist. He did a lot of good work. Throughout that fight. And then it seems like he got a little tired because of the sheer output that he had in the first 2.5 minutes or so. And then Drew Dober lands a really nice knee up the middle and puts Terence McKinney on his back and then follows it up with ground and pound, fights over. Now, first off, I've talked a lot about McKinney already, but for Drew Dober, this is a great win to go in there and face this early onslaught, stick through that, right? A lot of guys don't have a good enough chin or are not tough enough to make it through what Drew Dober made it through in that fight. So first off, credit to Drew Dober. And that is a veteran fight, right? You've got the young up-and-comer who hits the veteran with everything he's got. And then he gets a little tired, and the veteran capitalizes. So very, very good fight from Drew Dober. And then from there, Drew Dober calls out Bobby Green after the fight, and I'm not sure that is the fight that I want to see for Drew Dober next. But Drew Dober has some good options. I think Bobby Green is going to get rewarded with a main event against a top 10, top 15 lightweight. So I'm not sure that fight is going to happen next. Now, I do think I do think that Drew Dober is going to get a ranked opponent. Just looking, I like the Diego Ferreira fight. I think that fight stands out to me, and that's a good introduction to get Drew Dober back into those rankings because he was ranked before he lost to Brad Riddell. And, I mean, in that fight was madness, and that's an all-time great fight. So I'm not going to hold it over his head that he's got a loss to a ranked guy already. I think we get Drew Dober back in those rankings. And I think Ferreira is a very good introduction back into fighting ranked opponents. Now, back to Terence McKinney, because like I said, I'm very interested in Terence McKinney as a prospect. Obviously goes in there with a lot going against him, and he shows a lot of potential, right? The things we've seen from McKinney's 3 UFC fights, the 2 things that stick out to me, number 1 is the raw power, right? The shot he lands to put out for Vola, tremendous shot. The shots he landed against Dober, great shot. And then his wrestling as well. I mean, he went out there and got a couple takedowns against Dober. He goes in there against Frosty Ham, and it looks like a slip, or I don't know what happens at the beginning, but he scrambles very well, advances position, and then finds a submission. So, very, very strong wrestling to go with that power that he has, and that'll let him stay balanced as a fighter. You can mix takedowns with heavy shots. There's a lot you can do with that. So those 2 things already are already impressing me, right? And he is still young. He's 27, and he's got a lot of time to improve. And the reason that he lost that Drew Dober fight is because there are some clear things that he needs to fix, right? But before I list off some of the critiques might be a bad word, but some of the flaws of his performance, I'm not doing this to insult Terence McKinney. I'm doing this because I feel like Terence McKinney has a lot of potential, and I feel like there's like 2 or 3 things that Terence McKinney can do that will elevate his game very quickly. And I'm sure that his coaches will look back on this, say the same thing or similar things, and Terence McKinney will improve from this fight, and he'll learn a lot of lessons. So to get into it, right, we got to figure out the cardio situation, what's going on with that. Well, because he did get tired after about 2.5 minutes, or he seemed tired. I might be wrong. He might not have been tired. I could be completely off on this one. But he seemed tired, right? Now, is he tired? He's tired. He could be tired for a couple reasons, right? He could be tired because he took this fight on 10 days' notice, and who knows what he was doing after the fight. Did he, go to a pizza buffet and have 25 slices of pizza? I mean, there's guys who do stuff like that after they fight. Did he go out and party after he fought? Who knows? You don't know what Terence McKinney did after he fought. So that could be one thing. The short notice, he probably wasn't in the best shape he's ever been in for a fight. So that might not be a historical problem with Terence McKinney and his fighting career. From there, he can also improve that cardio a little bit by sizing up the strike selection, right? He lands one really good spinning back fist, and he throws it 2 more times after that. But, neither time was he really going to hit that, and it wasn't going to be too damaging, If you look at even the third one, Drew Dober missed or ducked it very easily and got to a good position after that. So things like that. Lower some of the wild actions that we're doing, right? And throw some more jabs, right? Throw the 2 behind the jab and put some combos together rather than just throwing some big shots out there. Because he can land the big shot, but we've seen that he can put you out with a straight right? So if you can just set up a straight right, throw some more jabs, I think that would do wonders for his game. Because if you're Terence McKinney, you're powerful enough to where you don't need to land a back fist to knock somebody out. You don't need to land a spinning hook kick to knock somebody out. You can knock someone out by just putting a good right hand on them, just putting a good straight on them, putting a good hook on them, right? So I think that's one area where we could improve if we see some, good strike selection and really just iron out that part of the game. And at the same time, that could have been something that him and his team talked about where, hey, I'm going to throw the kitchen sink at Drew Dober early and try and get him out of there because I might not have the cardio to go all 3 rounds because I took this on 10 days notice. That's also a possibility. Another thing I saw in this Drew Dober fight was he got some takedowns and he had some positions on top where he really gets eager to throw the ground and pound, right? And is he good at throwing ground and pound? Yes, he's very good at throwing ground and pound. But I'd like to see a little bit more focus on control, advancing position, looking for submissions, things like that. Because I watched him do that against Ziam, and he gets him out of there with the rear naked choke, right? So if you're Terence McKinney, in order to be successful on the ground, you don't need to land massive ground and pound shots. Does that mean not throw ground and pound? No. It just means mix it in a little bit better, right? There's some moments in there where I was like, oh, just stop punching, control, and then go back to the punches, right? And those, like I said, that's a small thing. He can have that fixed in a month, less than a month. He could have that fixed very soon. That isn't the type of issue that is going to plague you throughout your entire career, because that's a strategic thing and not a physical thing. It's not that he's not strong enough. You know what I mean? It's not that he's, isn't a good enough striker. He can do these things, and it's just going to take a little while he's going to take him a second to implement. And then, like I said, just those couple changes, if he can improve in some of those areas, I think he becomes a much better overall fighter, right? And I think that's what pushes him from prospect to contender, is making some of those small changes and small adjustments. And I think that this Drew Dober fight was a very good step towards that, because this fight gave him a lot of experience, right? He knows what it's like to go in there against someone of Drew Dober's caliber now, right? Drew Dober is one of the best lightweights in the world, right? So next time that he goes in there against someone like Drew Dober, or against someone like Brad Riddell, or against someone with a big name and a lot of experience, whether that be, Bobby Green, who knows who he fights down in the future, but I think he will be better prepared based off what happened to him in this fight, and I think he'll be able to put on a better performance. And another thing to talk about here is, if you're Terence McKinney, your stock is up, right? You can improve from a loss. Just because Terence McKinney lost, that doesn't mean his stock goes down, right? If he doesn't take this fight and doesn't put on this performance, he's fighting someone who, many people might not know the name of, right? He's fighting a guy lower in the UFC, a guy, maybe he's fighting another prospect, maybe he's fighting an older guy on their way out, maybe he's fighting someone who's, 1-2 in the UFC or 2-2 in the UFC. But now he's getting to the point where, based off that performance, you have to put him in there with someone not of that caliber, right? You don't want to put him in there against someone, at the same level as Drew Dober, but a level below. So when I was looking, the names that stood out to me were Hazrat, Rick Glenn, and Jared Gordon. I think those are guys with some experience, and those are guys who are not quite some of those crazy good guys at 155 pounds that aren't ranked yet, right? This isn't your Joel Alvarez. This isn't your Brad Riddell's ranked, but, this isn't your Bobby Green. This isn't your, it was Arman Sarukian. This isn't one of those guys who you're looking, going, oh, this guy is going to be ranked in 6 months or so. These are someone a level below that who are still going to give Terence McKinney a fight, but at the same time set him up to be successful in the future. So I think those are just some names where we could see McKinney booked in the near future. And then the last fight on the main card, And the last fight that we are going to talk about is Alex Pereira versus Bruno Silva. Now, this fight was kind of not the best fight for Alex Pereira because he's going in there against another striker, right? And does he win the fight? Yes. Does he almost get a finish late in the fight? Yes. Was this the best performance that you will ever see from Alex Pereira? No. Because the talk that we've seen about Pereira is, you know what? It's very similar to the talk that we've seen about Islam Makhachev, where before Islam Makhachev was ever ranked, people were saying he could be a champion at 155 pounds. He's one of the best guys in the world. That's the type of talk that we've seen about Alex Pereira based off his kickboxing resume. And when you have that type of hype around your name, when people are saying that you are the guy to beat Israel Adesanya, and you go in there against Bruno Silva, who is a great fighter. Bruno Silva is a great fighter, right? But he's not Israel Adesanya. He's not Robert Whittaker. He is not Marvin Vettori. He's not Paulo Costa. He's not any of those guys. Is he a good fighter? Yeah. Is he one of the elites at 185 pounds? No, unfortunately. So when you go in there against someone like Bruno Silva, you get taken down a couple times, right? Bruno Silva is, he's a striker at the end of the day. If you just look at his resume and who he's fought, go to his Tapology page, every single win is mostly by knockout. And when you go in there against someone like that and you get taken down, it's really discouraging because how is he going to get to a fight with Israel Adesanya? He's going to have to go through a wrestler, right? There's so many guys in that division that can take you down, whether that be Vettori, whether that be Hermanson, And if he doesn't show the proper takedown defense, he is going to get taken down by other strikers as well. Even if you're looking, you've got Andre Muniz, Chris Weidman, Kelvin Gastelum, right? There's a lot of guys that could take him down in those 185-pound rankings. So that's concern number one. On a positive note, we saw him get up, right? We did see him get up when he got taken down. He wasn't getting taken down and controlled for long periods of time. However, getting taken down and having to work off your back and get up is not the best in terms of energy, right? If you get taken down 20 times and have to get up off bottom 20 times, you are going to be tired. I know he obviously isn't going to get taken down 20 times in a fight, but it adds up quick when you're getting taken down and have to work to get off bottom. It's not easy. It is work to get off bottom. And that's concern number one. And concern number two is considering his kickboxing pedigree and considering the fact that many people consider him to be one of the best strikers at 185 pounds, he simply got hit too much, right? There were moments in that fight where I thought Bruno Silva could potentially get him out of there. Now, once again, Bruno Silva is a tremendous fighter and a tremendous striker. However, he is not Israel Adesanya. Like many people say, Alex Pereira will beat Israel Adesanya. And he's not your Robert Whittaker's. He's not the elite of the elite, even though he is a very, very good striker with a lot of power. So for me, just seeing him get taken down by a striker and seeing him get hit as much as he got hit, it was very concerning to me. And I think that sentiment is a very popular opinion. And I think the number of people that truly think that Alex Pereira can beat Israel Adesanya, I think that number of people decreased after this fight, despite his win. So what do we do next if we're Alex Pereira? I think the right move is, right, we got to get him in the rankings, right? At the end of the day, despite my strong critique, right, I usually don't like critiquing fighters like that, but I kind of felt it necessary based on how much we've seen from him in terms of the hype. Now, what we need to get him in the rankings, right? Bruno Silva is a very good win. He needs to be fighting a ranked opponent or a borderline ranked guy, right? The 13, 14, 15 spots are often a revolving door of rank in terms of the rankings. So maybe the guy doesn't necessarily have to be ranked, but highly respected type of opponent. And for me, I like the Edmund Shabazian fight. Edmund Shabazian is a highly respected striker. I say we throw him in there with Edmund Shabazian and see what we can get out of it. That is just my opinion on that. And then that's the last fight that we are going to talk about off UFC Fight Night, Santos versus Ankalaev. And now we are going to move forward into our news because we do have, I accidentally said 2 in the intro, but there are 3 big fight announcements that we need to talk about. One of them we already touched on a little bit. First of all, we have Tony Ferguson versus Michael Chandler being added to UFC 274. This makes 274 a much better card because that card had good prelims, right? But we needed a couple more fights for that main card. And the bout order is not official yet, but they showed some official fights, and you can find the official fights. And they had a really good basis for a strong pay-per-view, right? But you just needed a couple more fights. So this Tony Ferguson versus Michael Chandler fight is a good fight to add to that pay-per-view. And this fight is either going to be one of the greatest fights in the history of fighting, in the history of the UFC, in the history of MMA, or it is going to be one of the most depressing fights in MMA history, in UFC history, in the history of fighting. We're either going to see Tony Ferguson get knocked out cold. We're either going to see Tony Ferguson get beat up for 15 minutes, or we are going to see Michael Chandler and Tony Ferguson go to war. And if you're asking me what I think is going to happen, I'm not 100% sure yet, but I am leaning towards a dominant performance from Michael Chandler. Just unfortunately, I don't think that Tony Ferguson currently has it like he used to, and that pains me to say because Tony Ferguson is one of my favorite fighters. Right? My eyes will be tuned on the TV during this fight, but for Tony, if you look at those fights with Gaethje, very one-sided. If you look at the fight with Oliveira, very one-sided. Same with Beneil Dariush. So, I'm not overly confident in Tony, but at the same time, if there's anyone crazy enough to go through 3 completely dominant losses and come back and put on an incredible performance and win, it's Tony Ferguson. So I guess we're just going to have to wait and see what happens. And then we also had Robert Whittaker versus Marvin Vettori get booked. This fight is not... this fight, I really like this fight, but it's a weird fight, right? Because... Well, we'll start with why it's a good fight. Robert Whittaker and Marvin Vettori, both coming off losses to Israel Adesanya. They both lost the rematch with Israel Adesanya, and I think that they are probably the 2 best guys right now, outside of Izzy and maybe outside of Cannonier. If you want to talk about who's better between Cannonier and Vettori, you can talk all day. Doesn't really matter because Cannonier is fighting for the belt. So these are the best 2 guys who currently are not fighting for the belt. And so that's why it's a good fight. However, it's a bad fight because Robert Whittaker and Marvin Vettori, what do you do with the guy that wins? If you're Robert Whittaker, you win this fight, you're still ranked number 1, you're not getting the trilogy fight. If you're Marvin Vettori and you win this fight, you're now ranked number 1, but you're not getting that title fight. You're not getting that trilogy fight. So the UFC put themselves in a position where they forced that issue that the winner is going to be in a very awkward spot. Now, they could have avoided that by doing something like Whittaker versus Costa and Vettori versus Strickland, or Vettori versus Brunson, or something along those lines. And then if both those guys win, then you pair them up against each other afterwards. Now the winner's on a 2-fight winning streak and has a better case to fight for the title next. So that's just a thought. And But yeah, that's the only reason I'm not critically excited for this fight is because I'm like, well, what does the winner do, right? A fight really feels like it's important when there's something on the line. The question is what is on the line, and you can't answer that question, right? That's the number one thing that always makes a fight entertaining is what is on the line. In most scenarios, that is the belt. That is could be a personal rivalry like Colby, could be a personal like Colby and Masvidal, or it could simply be position in the rankings. And even this, like Robert Whittaker, if he wins, doesn't move. If Marvin Vettori wins, it feels like he technically moves up, but it doesn't feel like he moves that much. So that's just the reason I'm not completely stoked for this fight. But it should be an entertaining fight, and it should be fun to watch. Now, the last fight that was announced was a Fight Night main event. Oh, excuse me. Whittaker versus Vettori got added to 275. I think I forgot to say that earlier. And the last fight that we're going to talk about that was booked was Marlon Vera versus Rob Font. Very good fight booking. And I think that fight makes a lot of sense. And the winner is going to be in a very good position at 135 to take on the elite of that division, whether that be someone like Aldo. Well, I guess they've both already fought Aldo, or whether that be someone like Dillashaw or Aljamain coming off a loss. The winner of that is going to get an elite opponent who sets them up for a title shot. So I think this, especially if you're Marlon, Rob Font might have to win too, but the winner of this fight is going to be in a very strong position in this bantamweight division. And then that was the last piece of news that we had to discuss. All right, so now we are going to move into a discussion on UFC Fight Night. Volkov versus Aspinall, which is the UFC's return to London. And this is a very good card, a lot of fun fights. Aspinall versus Volkov, obviously a tremendous main event. I really like Tom Aspinall in this one. I think that he is a good enough striker to where he can deal with some of Volkov's tools. If you let Volkov kick you in the body from distance, if you let Volkov throw some good jabs and some straights, you're going to be in a lot of trouble. And I think that Tom Aspinall is a good enough striker to where he can avoid some of those shots, get inside, and do some damage on the interior. And that's not to say that Volkov can't strike from the inside, because he's got a good Muay Thai base with elbows and knees, and he also has some nice hooks. But I think I see Tom Aspinall winning those exchanges inside. And I also think Aspinall's patient enough to where he's not going to get himself in unnecessary danger fighting Volkov. And then I also like Aspinall as a grappler. In some of his previous fights, the discussion has been, can he grapple? And I think he's proven that he's a good enough grappler for this heavyweight division. And he's attempted takedowns. I mean, he submitted Andrei Arlovsky. And I think this is like a situation where the biggest thing is he's comfortable enough, right? He's comfortable enough to shoot that takedown. A lot of guys don't have that comfort to shoot that takedown. And so for him to be comfortable and effective in his wrestling, I think he can pair that very, very good striking he has with his quality grappling to go out there and earn a decision victory. And with that being said, I also see a knockout possibility as well. Just because it's heavyweight, there's always a chance for a knockout, whether that be Aspinall or Volkov. But Aspinall specifically because he is a very powerful striker. And then in the co-main, a fight that just screams tremendous fight is Dan Hooker versus Arnold Allen. As long as Dan Hooker's frame holds up, moving from lightweight to featherweight, that is a concern. Usually I usually don't get concerned when fighters are dropping weight classes, But with Dan Hooker, I get a little concerned because he is big for that 145-pound weight class, and he left that weight class for a reason. So I am a little concerned about that. And Arnold Allen is a tremendous fighter as well, and I really could see this fight going either way, but I lean Dan Hooker based off the experience. If he goes in there at 100%, we've seen him go to war with Dustin Poirier and go to war with Paul Felder. I think those experiences demonstrate his character and willingness to go in there and get in a brawl, and I think that is going to play a big role in him getting a victory over Arnold Allen. And I think he can do that. And I think the knees of Dan Hooker will also play a role in that. So, three round fight. I think it goes decision. I think it's going to be a very, very entertaining fight. I think it wins fight of the night. And I lean Dan Hooker. Now, if Arnold Allen goes out there and gets a decision win, am I going to be shocked? Absolutely not, because Arnold Allen is a dog. Could Arnold Allen find a finish? Yeah. Who knows what Dan Hooker's chin looks like right now? Historically, Dan Hooker has a very good chin. With that being said, Dan Hooker is dropping a weight class, so that chin may be a little compromised. If the chin holds up, I think it's tough for Arnold Allen to find that knockout. So, overall, like I said, I'm leaning Dan Hooker in a fight of the night decision against Arnold Allen. Now, also on the main card, we have Paddy Pimblett versus Rodrigo Vargas. And this is an interesting fight because Paddy Pimblett is so popular. And whether people like it or not, there are people who know who Paddy Pimblett is and don't know who Arnold Allen is, right? There's people who know who Paddy Pimblett is but don't know who Dan Hooker is. Paddy Pimblett appeals to a very wide audience, right? Very well known. And he has some very, very strong qualities as a fighter. Very powerful. He can go out there and get a finish. He can also grapple, right? He's not he's not a one-trick pony when it comes to that. He can go out there and grapple a little bit. He can find submissions, right? So I lean Paddy in this fight. I just don't see Rodrigo Vargas giving him the biggest problem in the world. And with that being said, I do not think that Paddy Pimblett is this guy who's going to eventually get ranked at 155 pounds. I just think he has too many holes in his game at the current moment. But I think he gets this one done. I don't think this one is the fight that derails his hype train. So I think he goes out there, and I think he can win by knockout or by decision, and even by submission. So a lot of positives for Paddy Pimblett going into this one. So I'm picking Paddy Pimblett. On the main card, welterweight, we also have Gunnar Nelson versus Takashi Sato. Give me Gunnar Nelson. Anytime you've got a veteran like Gunnar Nelson, I don't like picking against him, right? And that might be a new thing that started recently because I see guys like Jim Miller go out there and get wins all the time. And, Takashi Sato is a very good fighter. But I just think Gunnar Nelson's got the experience. And Soto's last loss was a submission loss to Michael Baeza. So I think Gunnar Nelson can go out there and find a submission and get this fight over with. Also, I'm not sure that this is the official bout order that I'm looking at, actually. I'm just looking at fights at this point. This can't be the official bout order. My bad. Because there's no way Gunnar Nelson and Takashi Soto's on the main card, but Nikia Krylov versus Paul Craig isn't. That wouldn't make much sense. So just ignore the bout order here. We're just going to talk about the best fights. Shamil Abudarikamov and that is one of the names I have the hardest time pronouncing, so that's why you usually hear me say Shamil every time I talk about him. He's taking on Sergey Pavlovich. Very good fight at heavyweight. These are two guys in that 10, maybe Shamil's 9. 9 to 15 range, and winner sets himself up very well. I'm going to lean Sergey in this one. His only losses to Alistair Overeem, and Shamil is just not someone that I'm as high on. I've seen him get finished. He got finished by Dauskas, so I think that Sergey should be able to go out there and find a finish in this one. Also, on this card, we've got Nikita Krylov versus Paul Craig. And this is an interesting fight because any fight Paul Craig is in is interesting because that man knows how to grapple, and that is why I am picking Paul Craig. Paul Craig is I don't like picking against Paul Craig. Last time I picked against Paul Craig, he dislocated Jamal Hill's elbow. So I'm not going to do it in this one. Can Nikita Krylov go out there and get a win? Sure he can. He's got 3 losses in his run in the UFC. That's not true. He's got he's got way more than 3 losses. My bad. But his last 3 losses have been to Magomed Ankalaev, Glover Teixeira, and Jan Blachowicz. 3 guys that you do not scoff at in that division. Might be the 3 best fighters in that division. His other losses are to Misha Kirkinov, Ovince St. Preux, Seo Pereira. Those are his UFC losses, and we're not going to go back prior to the UFC. He's been in the UFC for a long time, but the one trend that you do see on Krylov's in his losses is here is an arm triangle loss, Von Flue choke, guillotine, arm triangle, and then 2 decision losses. So I think he can submit him, is the point I'm trying to make here. And I don't like taking the guy that can get submitted when he's fighting Paul Craig. So give me Paul Craig in that one. Now, another important fight is Jack Shore versus Timur Valiev. These are 2 of the better prospects at bantamweight. I'm not going to say either of them are the best just because of how good the prospects are at bantamweight. But these are 2 very, very good fighters. But give me Jack Shore. I just think at this point, I'm riding with Jack Shore until he loses because I have been very impressed with every fight I've ever seen Jack Shore in. Well, that might not be true, but you get what I'm saying. Very good wrestler, and I think he can go out there and wrestle himself to a victory. Only 27 years old, so I think he has probably made some improvements as well. Molly McCann versus Louisiana Carolina. Give me Molly McCann. Give me Molly McCann in her hometown. Well, not her hometown, her home country. Fighting on the same card as Paddy Pimblett. This just seems like the type of fight that she would go and win. So give me Molly McCann. Some other important fights on this card. We've got Illia Topuria versus Jai Herbert. Illia Topuria is, I think, one of the better prospects in the UFC, and especially in that 145-pound division. Once again, a lot of good prospects in that division, but I think he's one of the better ones. And this is another situation of I think Illia Topuria is a great fighter. His finish of Ryan Hall wasn't, I don't want to say incredible, but he approached that fight very well. Got out of there with a win. Who was the other guy he fought? Where he fought someone and really beat the crap out of him, and got a really nice finish up against the cage. Damon Jackson, I think, is that fight. Showed some very good grappling against Yusuff Zalal. So I think that Illia Topuria is a very good fighter. that has good opportunities to find finishes against Jai Herbert. And then Muhammad Mokaev. If you don't know who this guy is, be informed. He is probably the best prospect at 125 pounds. The UFC doesn't have a lot of prospects at 125 pounds because they neglect to sign young up-and-comers at 125 pounds like they do other divisions. But don't get me started on that because I could talk about that for a while. Now, Muhammad Mokaev is currently 5-0 in pro MMA. However, he has, I believe, 23 amateur fights, and he is only 21 years of age. And this guy is making his UFC debut, and I am ready to see him in the UFC. And the UFC gave him a good matchup in Cody Duran, where Cody is a good fighter, right? But Cody's not a ranked guy at 125 pounds. So this is going to be a test, right? He's getting tested, but he's not getting something impossible. And I'm leaning towards Muhammad Mokaev, and let's see what he can do because I am excited to finally see him make his UFC debut. And then Nathaniel Wood, another young guy at bantamweight who, hasn't really lived up to the expectations as well in the UFC. Coming into the UFC with a Cage Warriors belt, he was expected to be a lot better. Has losses to Casey Kenny and John Dodson. Not terrible losses, but a lot of people thought he was going to win those fights. Taking on Vince Morales, who is no bum in his own right. But I do think that Nathaniel Wood can go out there and get this fight done. And then those are really the only fights that I wanted to talk about off of UFC London. The other fights that I did not mention were Mike Grundy versus Makwan Amirkhani and Elise Reed versus Corey McKenna. Overall, this is an incredible fight night card. So make sure you don't miss that. I'll be talking about it next week. I'll be recapping. I'll probably be talking about a lot of those fights because a lot of those are very interesting fights. And make sure you tune into that. So make sure you look out again next Sunday for a new episode. But thank you for the week off because I did take the week off to go on spring break. So I was a little disappointed I didn't get to talk about Covington and Masvidal because there was a lot of fun stuff on that card. I would have loved to talk about that card, but I missed it. So thank you for your patience in that. And thank you for watching this episode of the Head Kick KO podcast. And hopefully you'll be back next week. Goodbye.